You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your hosts, Andrew Chang and Justin Godwin.
Bills Mafia. Welcome into another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo FamBase podcast network. My name is Justin. I will be your host tonight. And if you've made it this far, go ahead and take a second, like, share, subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you're not missing any episodes we got coming out. It does help us with what we're doing here, and we just want to bring you the content every week. So hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're not missing anything. And, while you're doing it, check out the FamBase network. There's shows all over the network, live shows, different podcasts. There's something out there for everybody. So, we put out this show once a week. If you're looking for some other content throughout the week, we got tons of great shows on the network. Go ahead and check it out. See if there's anything else you like. So we're going to get into it this week. There's not much Bills-related news, so I kind of wanted to take a second to look at the rest of the division and kind of where it stacks up. And I think this is important to do. We've heard Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott talk about it so many times. Kind of the first step to, before you start talking about winning the conference, going to the Super Bowl, all that. The first step is winning your division. And I think it's a good time of the year. A lot of the offseason moves have kind of fizzled out. We're going to see some tinkering. We'll see some injuries and whatnot happen during camps. But for the most part, we pretty much have the roster settled. So I just kind of want to go through, I guess I'm kind of projecting where I think each team in the division will finish. And we'll kick it off with the Jets. And I'm going in reverse order here. So this is my prediction of the Jets being in the basement of the division. And I kind of waffled back and forth between 3 and 4, and for me it kind of came down to, yes, I think the Jets had a great offseason. I think they've done a ton to move the team in the right direction, and I think Joe Douglas is showing that he's a pretty capable GM. Now a lot of these moves we've seen him make are still young players who have some developing to do. But as far as I can see with the picks that he's made, it seems like he's kind of making the right decisions. For me, the Jets being at the bottom, I could see them moving up in the division a bit. But I have to factor in team history and like the what have you done for me lately. So until I see it, they kind of have to earn their way out of the basement, at least for my opinion. So just looking at, some of the roster, quarterback, obviously you got Zach Wilson in his second year. And what I like about what they're doing with this roster construction is they're really trying to take the isolating the variable approach to Zach Wilson. Whereas they're kind of loading up on offense with talent, and if you give Zach Wilson 2-3 years with the talent that they're assembling around him, and he's not looking like a franchise guy, you have the pieces in place. You got to go in a different direction there. So they added Michael Carter in the draft last year, who was really emerging. They go ahead and add Breece Hall this year in the draft. Many draft experts, people smarter than me, had Breece Hall rated as the best running back in the draft. And between the two of them, you can establish a pretty strong run game, help Zach Wilson out a little bit, help work in the play action game. So I think overall they really improved at the running back position over the last 2 years. And then wide receivers, where they've really been making some investments. And again, another young guy, Elijah Moore, was drafted last year, tail end of the first round. He's a player that I really wanted to see go to the Bills last year. And he had a pretty nice rookie year. Corey Davis playing opposite him, that big physical receiver, can win the jump balls, can get the possession catches. Then they go ahead and add Garrett Wilson in the draft this year. And I guess I would say the only thing receiver-wise that I would do differently if I was running the Jets is trying to see what you have in that young quarterback in Zach Wilson. Kind of the approach Brandon Beane took of he was adding younger guys, but he was also bringing in the veterans that can perform in this league. There's no developing the quarterback and the receiver at the same time, which is great when it happens and you have two young guys that they develop right on the same trajectory. You got them together for 5, 6, 7 years. That's awesome to see. But also, if there's something that's not working out there, it's a lot harder to be like, oh, was this top 10 receiver that we drafted, is he a bust, or is he just not getting the opportunities because we drafted the wrong quarterback? So I mean, you have Corey Davis in kind of that veteran role, but these other guys are pretty young, so it's a little bit harder if Zach Wilson is struggling to say whether or not it's him per se. Then also at receiver, Braxton Berrios, who we know last year was pretty dangerous in the return game. And whenever I'm talking about Jets, I always throw Denzel Mims into this conversation. He's had a very slow start to his career, and I don't like to ignore the fact that he was a second-round pick just 2 years ago. Wide receiver can be a position that takes some time to develop. So if he turns into something similar to what they expected him to be, that could be a pretty dangerous receiving core. Again, my only real criticism here is a lot of youth at the position to have a young quarterback playing with. At tight end, they kind of bolstered the group, adding C.J. Uzomah from Cincinnati and Ty Conklin from the Vikings. And I guess I like this move for them because they knew it was a position that needed to be upgraded. I'm not sure that Uzomah was the guy that I would have done it with. I believe he broke out last year with Cincinnati, but I believe it was his 5th year in the league, something like that, 4th, 5th year. And I know tight end can be kind of a slow developing position, but I'm also looking at Cincinnati having Joe Burrow, who's really coming into his own as one of the top quarterbacks in the league. You had Jamar Chase burst onto the scene, and it was just a really explosive offense that I think Uzomah was able to capitalize on his opportunities based on all the other factors around him being like a 4th, 5th option in the receiving game, and having that top tier quarterback that could get him the ball, that could go through his progressions and find him. I'm not sure that we're going to see quite the same player with the Jets. And who knows, maybe Zach Wilson does take a major step forward and I can get a bunch of comments thrown my way about how wrong I was. I'm not seeing it as a veteran tight end brought in free agency. I don't think that's going to end up being a great move for them. And then, the offensive line stays much the same, but you have some young guys there as well. You have Mekhi Becton coming back, Elijah Vera Tucker, who you drafted last year. I think that if they can continue to gel and develop together, I think that's a pretty good offensive line. And I think the biggest thing for that offensive line performing is Zach Wilson taking that next step in his game and playing a bit more in structure. And we saw a lot of Zach Wilson in college. Kind of what made him so electric was when he went off script and he would get to these second, third options and find dudes running wide open because he was able to keep plays alive with his legs, which is great to have in the NFL for when things break down around you. But you also have to, play within some rhythm and timing and be getting the ball out. You can't be relying on that type of gameplay, play in and play out. And I think that was the biggest thing I saw from Zach Wilson's rookie year. Towards the end of the season, it seemed like it was coming together for him a little bit. But a lot of happy feet in the pocket, kind of a little bit like Josh Allen's rookie year, where he was looking for the opportunity to take off. He was, not standing in the pocket. He was drifting back in the pocket with pass rush coming up right up the middle. So a lot of nice moves on the offensive side of the ball. And for the Jets, again, it's the most important position in football. This is all going to come down to whether or not Zach Wilson is the guy that can do it, and where they go from there after that. So that's on the offensive side of the ball for the Jets. On the defensive side, they made some improvements, but we're also talking about the worst defense in the league, and the worst defense in the league last year. And when I start looking at their roster on the defensive side of the ball, I could understand them not being, like a number one defense. There are some holes in the defense, but they have some players over there, so it kind of confuses me how they ended up dead last. Maybe it's partially to do with the offense struggling and them being on the field a lot. But I think the biggest addition to the defensive side of the ball is going to be in head coach Robert Saleh and the defense that he was able to run in San Francisco. And he seems like a real motivating defensive coach. So just getting kind of some of the best out of some of these players, I think we'll see a pretty significant jump up in the Jets defense. Player-wise, they're getting Carl Lawson back. Obviously, a defensive end who was their big free agent addition last year. Goes and tears his Achilles, I think it was the first day of training camp, something like that, and ends up missing the whole season. So he's going to be huge to get back on the field, and it's almost like they just signed him this year at this point. But he has been, around the building, learning systems, all that throughout the past year, getting to know the guys. So he should come in, not just from square one. He's kind of already been immersed in it, if you will. So he's coming back, and with him out last year, we really saw Jonathan Franklin Myers kind of emerge. I believe he ended up with 6 sacks last year, and they just re-signed him to another contract. So we'll see if he's kind of got more ceiling to grow into, or if that's kind of who he is as a player. But I know we were talking, I think it was the first matchup against the Jets last year, and as I was going through the roster, I followed the teams in the division pretty closely, and I see this guy, Jonathan Franklin Myers, and I had to kind of take a second look to know a little bit more about the guy, and now he's kind of blossomed into a legitimate NFL starter. So kudos there. They seems to be like a diamond in the rough they found. And then adding to the edge room, they also draft Jermaine Johnson in the first round of this draft. So some young talent there to groom in and learn behind a guy like Carl Lawson. I'm sure he's going to get a healthy amount of snaps in his first season. But a situation where they kind of have the depth in front of him, so he's not, this first round pick edge rushing savior. He can kind of come in and learn the ropes of the NFL without too much pressure on him right from the start. We move into the linebackers. Hamza Nasr-Eldin he's going to be taking kind of the next step into this defense. And if you guys have been listening long enough to have caught any of our draft episodes, 2021, he's a guy that I really wanted with the Bills. Kind of that positionless safety, linebacker, coverage guy, tight end eraser, whatever you want to call it, the big nickel. He didn't get too much run last year, and I'm interested to see in what he does if he's able to take on more responsibility. Was he not on the field much last year because he was developing slowly? Was it, poor coaching decisions? Not really sure what we're seeing there, but I think he's going to be a really interesting player to keep an eye on. I think he could really change the defense of the Jets on the second and third level of defense with his, tight end coverage abilities, his ability to play as kind of a linebacker safety hybrid. And then next to him, C.J. Mosley, who I think he had a down year for him last year, and I always think of C.J. Mosley. I mean, he's been a good linebacker in the league for years, but every time I see C.J. Mosley's name, I immediately think of the game against the Jets. I think it was 2 years ago now, where he was single-handedly wrecking us. He had an interception or a fumble return for a touchdown. He was just everywhere on the field, and he ends up getting hurt in that game somewhere third or fourth quarter, whatever it was, and we were able to mount a comeback. And I always look at that game as like, man, we got awfully lucky in that game that Mosley had to miss some time, because the way he was playing in that game, we had no answer for it. And like I said, he was absolutely wrecking our offense on that game. So I guess he's somebody I'll keep an eye on to see if last year was kind of the anomaly. Maybe he's starting to get a little bit on the downside of his career. But like I said, defensive coach like Robert Saleh, you'd think that he's going to get the best out of a player like C.J. Mosley, who we've seen have success in the NFL. Kind of just had like one down year, but it was also on a defense that overall wasn't performing. So if Saleh's going to kind of get everybody moving in the right direction, I think C.J. Mosley could be poised for a really nice bounce back year and could kind of return to that top level form that we've seen from him. And the secondary is where I think this team, at least offensively, is the most interesting to me. Obviously, they add Ahmad Sauce Gardner in the first round. I think he's an absolute stud. We'll see how it works out with him, being thrust right into the role in his rookie year. I know he said something about, I think I can cover Stephon Diggs, and that became a whole storyline because we're in the NFL offseason and we're looking for storylines. But I mean, what's the guy supposed to say in that situation? Like, I just got drafted top 5 NFL draft. What do you think about covering Stephon Diggs? Ugh, that guy scares me. I don't think I can do it. So, I know he got a lot of heat for that and whatnot, but I don't know. I think it's a non-story. I don't know what else the guy's supposed to say. Back end, they also had DJ Reed, Jordan Whitehead. I think they're both good players. Nothing that's really, crazy tipping the scale for me, but I mean, their secondary was terrible last year. So even these small upgrades are going to do wonders to improving the defense. And then kind of the depth that they found, I think their 2 cornerbacks in Bryce Hall and the other Michael Carter on the team, I think they both started playing pretty well in the second half of last season. And these are young guys that were kind of put into pretty significant roles. So, I mean, if that ends up being your backup depth guys, or they're they're competing for a starting spot. Much like we talk about with the Bills all the time, the iron sharpening iron. I feel like there's part of it that they were kind of just out there last year because they didn't have any other options. But in that role, they were able to kind of develop into people that looked like they belonged on the field. Now there's competition kind of brought in above them. So, I mean, these are guys competing at the highest level of sports. They're not just going to be like, oh, well, you drafted a guy and brought in a free agent, so I guess I'll put my tail between my legs and go back to the bench. These guys are going to compete for those jobs, and with the way I saw them developing last year, I wouldn't be surprised if one of them ends up still in the starting lineup. So overall, really wanted to move the Jets out of the basement. The next team I'm going to talk about here, I think when I line up the rosters side by side, I don't really see a path to the next team's roster really being better than this. I think they're about the same. But for me, as I said before, it's kind of the track record of who we know the Jets to be, and we had it in Buffalo for this, the 17-year playoff drought, and whenever it looked like we were putting a team together, it was always, well, we know who the Bills are, so when we see it happen, we'll believe it. And that's kind of where I'm at with the Jets right now. And I think they could see a pretty significant improvement from last year. I don't think we're in a position where we're talking about anything better than third in the division. I don't think we're talking about a playoff spot, anything like that. So we're going to jump into a quick break here. When I come back, we'll get into the team that I have finishing third in the division, and then the team that I have finishing second, because obviously the Bills are going to be in first. Stick around.
Hey, this is Bills Vader. Now back to the show.
Bills Mafia, welcome back, and thank you again for joining me on today's episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast. We're going to jump back in with the team that I believe will finish third in the division, and that is the New England Patriots. And before the break, we talked kind of about the Jets' track record and why that's keeping them in the basement. And for me, with the Patriots, it's kind of quite the opposite. It's their track record that's keeping them out of the basement. I don't think they're competing to win the division. There's a bit of an arms race going on, not only in the AFC East, but the AFC as a whole. It just got stupid competitive this year and already was. But the moves that I see the Patriots making are kind of head-scratching to me. And Bill Belichick as a coach keeps them out of the basement. We've seen over the past 2 years without Brady, he was able to put together a pretty competitive roster with Cam Newton starting at quarterback, with Mac Jones in his rookie year. Going down the stretch last year, it was kind of like game for game with the Bills, and they took the division lead at one point there. And doing that with a rookie quarterback is impressive, don't get me wrong. But what I look at with the Patriots is kind of when I talk about this arms race that's going on in the AFC, we saw the Patriots start this 2 years ago and go out and have just a ridiculous spending spree in free agency, bringing in Kendrick Bourne, Nelson Aguilar, Jalen Mills, Hunter Henry, and Jonnu Smith, both getting massive tight end contracts. And I feel like that was kind of like pushing all the chips in of like, we're going to reset real quick and we're going to compete this year. And I mean, it kind of worked out, I guess. They were right there. They made the playoffs. We all know how that went in the playoff round. But I feel like this offseason was kind of anticlimactic for them, I guess. Excuse me. So I like some of the additions they've made. I think Pierre Strong, added as a running back in the draft, I think he fits that exact prototype of running back that the Patriots like to have. We've seen tons of players. I mean, Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson on the roster, both kind of similar running backs to me. Kind of the guy that can hit you between the tackles, but also has some speed once he gets going downhill. And we've seen Damian Harris have huge games against the Bills, and with Mac Jones still being a young quarterback, with him having some physical limitations, if you're looking at it through the Patriots lens of, well, every year we have to be competing to win the division, I think even though it was a later round investment in Pierre Strong, I think he's a guy that can slot right in behind Stevenson, behind Damian Harris, and have a role on this team. And I think if you're the Patriots right now and you're looking at beating the Bills, you're looking at trying to avoid getting into a shootout with the Bills, and you're gonna have a hard time going shot for shot with Josh Allen with a ton of quarterbacks in the league, let alone Mac Jones, who has shown he's got the cerebral aspect to the game. He makes good decisions, but he's never going to have that same arm talent, the same athleticism as Josh Allen. So I think the path for them to compete with the Bills is having that strong running game, is having that run game that can punch you in the face 30, 40, 50 times a game. And, granted, it was the wind game. It was really strange circumstances, but, we played a game against the Patriots, elements aside, that they said, hey, we're going to run the ball every goddamn play, and we're going to see if you can stop us. And over the course of a whole game, I believe Mac Jones had 3 passing attempts, and they ran the ball, and it worked. Now, again, the ridiculous elements playing into the game, does that keep the Bills' offense from being as potent as it could have been, blah, blah, blah. We can get into all the semantics of it, but the situation that the game was held in, it was a recipe for success. And yes, most games aren't going to be played in those kinds of elements, but the idea of kind of managing the clock and limiting the amount of attempts that Josh Allen gets to lead the offense is what a team like the Patriots has to do to beat them. So I think investing into that was a smart move. And Pierre Strong was a guy that I liked going to the Bills. If we were to take a running back later in the draft, obviously, we kind of pivoted and took an entirely different skill set at running back in the second round in James Cook, which I also like. But for the kind of every down can run between the tackles kind of guy, Pierre Strong was somebody I was interested in. When we move into the receivers, this is kind of where I've been scratching my head with the Patriots for a long time, and I'm glad to do it. I'll gladly keep scratching my head at their receiver moves, but this is going back to really as long as I can remember, and I think for so long, Tom Brady being so good at playing the position of quarterback, he would elevate the types of receivers, even like they have now, and they would end up being really productive players, going all the way back. Troy Brown, Deion Branch, Wes Welker, Danny Amendola, a ton of these guys who have gone elsewhere and not really had much success. And I feel like over the last few years, they've been bringing in the same types of players. Jacoby Myers, Kendrick Bourne, Nelson Aguilar, adding Ty Montgomery this year, and also Devontae Parker. And nothing against any of these guys. I think they're all, NFL caliber receivers. But I would put them in like a 2A, 2B conversation. Somebody that if you get one of those top flight receivers can really be productive on the other side. I don't see any like alpha type receiver on their roster, and plenty of targets, plenty of players to get the ball to that can make plays. Aguilar can take the top off the team. Devontae Parker, I like him as a player. I don't understand the addition of him. I don't think he really brings a skill set that they didn't have, and he's kind of another big-bodied possession receiver, and he's had great games against the Bills too. I just where we saw with the Jets and what I'm going to end up talking about with the Dolphins is the really ability to isolate the variable of the quarterback. And I think that's so important to do when you have these young quarterbacks, because you're tying so much of your franchise to it. And you can have a great roster, but the days of a Brad Johnson, Trent Dilfer kind of just keeping the team steady while the defense wins you championships, I don't think that league exists anymore. And it's not to say that you can't have kind of a middle of the road quarterback and win a championship. I'm not saying that at all, but that's going to have to be with an absolutely elite defense. The NFL is very high flying, very pass heavy. It's not so much this ground game, ball control, defense hold them to 10 points anymore. I mean, you need to go out and score 30 plus points on a regular basis to be one of the top teams in this league. And that's where I feel like the Patriots are coming up short as an organization right now. And I think obviously it's only Mac Jones' second year. Maybe next year, the following year, they're able to make more additions that make more sense to me to really diagnose Mac Jones. But we're seeing, we'll talk about Miami, but we talked about all the talent that they added in New York to put around Zach Wilson, to put him in the best position to succeed. So if he's not taking steps, it's Zach Wilson. And with the receiving talent here, I don't think they're doing Mac Jones or themselves any favors in really trying to get their answer. The tight end position, obviously we saw them add Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith last year, both to massive contracts. This is part of the Belichick roster building that I don't fully wrap my head around. I think adding one or the other would have been just fine, but adding both of these tight ends that command such a share of the ball to be productive, I think it ends up being a numbers game. And when we look at the production from last season, Hunter Henry had a great year, but Jonnu Smith was kind of lost in translation. And I think Jonnu Smith kind of got an overinflated contract for his production in Tennessee, as kind of just being, we're going to lean on the run game and we'll squirt the ball out into your hands and you go make a play. And I think that kind of got a little bit lost in New England. I don't think it was ever really a great fit, but when you make the move with Hunter Henry also slotting in ahead of him, it just never really made sense to me. And as the season played out, we saw Jonnu Smith have a down year. Obviously still an immense amount of talent there. So maybe with a full season under their belt, another offseason, maybe they find a way to kind of get that all on the same page and really get both of them involved. But that's, to me, it's kind of like an embarrassment of riches at the position, and there's only so many balls to go around. So we'll see what happens there, but I think we see a lot more of Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith kind of in the background again, like last season. And then wrap off the offensive side of the ball with their offensive line. I feel like it's always a good line in New England, and they got big guys that move people. They run the ball well. My biggest complaint here for them is I think they downgraded. They let Shaq Mason walk. He ends up in Tampa Bay playing with Tom Brady. But I think he was arguably the most valuable piece, at least against the offensive line, if not on the offense. A Pro Bowl guard, and they draft Cole Strange in the first round to be his replacement. And I don't like going too crazy into, the draft grades and instant draft reactions. It's fun and whatnot, but it's really just a thought exercise. Everybody's saying that it was a huge reach for New England. Well, if he comes in and he's a day one starter and he can replace the production of Shaq Mason, great. And it would have been cooler if you got him on day 2 of the draft, day 3 of the draft, where he was projected to go. But I'm all for if you know that guy is your guy, he's your player, he fits your system, he's they're bringing him for workouts, meetings, all that. If that's your guy, go get him. My concern there is you are taking a player who hasn't played at the NFL level yet. You're betting on his projections. You're betting on his skill set, his attributes, what you think he's going to be in the league, versus keeping a guy like Shaq Mason around who's been in your system, who's shown that he can do it on a high level. So just kind of a head scratcher to me. It could work out just fine. I think they're going to see at least a short-term setback with the offensive line, just from a continuity standpoint. Just all of them getting on the same page, gelling, and getting into that form. So we'll move on to the defensive side of the ball. And this is the spot on New England's team that I think always gives them a chance to be in the conversation. And when I look at the defense as a whole, there's guys I like, but not, to me, it doesn't look like a top-tier defense on paper. But this is where Belichick kind of gets that benefit of the doubt, a little bit of credit. I mean, he's been a great defensive coach for decades. So even when you look at it and you only see a few guys that really pop to you, like, Belichick's going to get the best out of that defense. So up front, Dietrich Weiss, Christian Barmore, Devin Godshaw, Lawrence Guy. This has been a really solid front four for them. Just a bunch of big boys that eat up space. And when you're looking at the numbers, these guys, they really run a defense that tries to keep the linebackers clean. And they have the 4-3 defense where their outside linebackers are doing a lot of the pass rushing. So you don't really see gaudy numbers from these guys. But what they do with the defense and what they're able to free up for the second level, for the third level of the defense, is really where their value are. And I think because of that reason, some of these guys get a little bit underrated. But overall, I think it's a really solid front four. And then the linebackers that we talked about. Josh Uche coming back. Matt Judon, who they signed last year. And Jawan Bentley. And I think this is a really, really good linebacking core. Josh Uche, I believe he had some injuries last year, but he was looking really good 2 years ago. Obviously, they bring in Matt Judon last year, and he was an absolute force. 12 and a half sacks in his first year with the team. So you can't argue with that production there. And I think we're going to see much more of the same. Like I said, this defense likes to use those outside linebackers to get to the quarterback. So I think we end up seeing another monster year from Matt Judon. I don't know if I'm willing to say 12.5 again, but I mean, it was also his first year in the system, and now he's in the second year of it, and we'll see what happens there. But that's a guy that you always got to be keeping an eye on, and he can, two plays hitting the quarterback, forcing a fumble, forcing a bad pass, and that can change the tide of an entire game. So his value to that defense is huge. And then in the secondary, this is a place where they've made some additions, but they also had some subtractions. And last year, part of the spending spree, brought in Jalen Mills. He's not a player that I've ever really loved at cornerback. I think he's a good cornerback. I think he's a little bit overrated, and they gave him a pretty good sized contract. And playing across from J.C. Jackson, I think they had a pretty good secondary there. But you let J.C. Jackson walk this year, and you bring back Super Bowl hero Malcolm Butler. Obviously he had a pretty good tenure with New England his first time around. Everybody's going to, remember him from that Seattle Super Bowl game-winning interception. But I feel like he's been a pretty average cornerback since. He left, got a good contract, and we're talking what's that Seattle Super Bowl was like 6-7 years ago now, and you're kind of dipping back into that player pool of somebody I think it would be a nice move if you were bringing him in for depth and you still had J.C. Jackson here. I don't. The move doesn't do anything to make me think that they improved in the position or even maintain their floor. And then similar move, bringing back Devin McCourty. It's a guy who's had a great run with the Patriots, but getting up there in age, and I think there is something to be said for the continuity, I guess, the player recognition in the system, knowing the team, knowing how Belichick likes to run it, having that leader. I think it's kind of time to move away from some of those guys and bring in younger pieces. Do have Kyle Duggar on the back end as well, who's a player I love him as a player. Kind of that positionless linebacker safety. He'll help in the run, he'll help in the pass, and I think they have a really good player in Duggar. So overall, New England's the hardest one for me to really get a grasp on, because we saw the run that they had last year, finishing second in the division. I could see them being anywhere from second in the division to being fourth in the division, and I mean, a lot of it has to do with the play of Mac Jones, and if he takes a step. I think for New England, there's a little bit less pressure of the quarterback position is going to make or break this team because of who Belichick is as a coach. We saw them be competitive with Cam Newton, and Cam Newton was an absolute shell of his former self. He could still run the ball a little bit, but he really brought nothing in the passing game, and I think they still won 6-7 games, doing that experiment. So whereas I think a team like New York has, and maybe we'll see it be a little bit different with Saleh coming in, but I think there's so much more riding on the quarterback position in New York than New England, because I give Belichick the vote of confidence that with his coaching, with his game planning, with the defense that he's going to bring in, they're going to be competitive in games, and Mac Jones can be that. I don't like the term, but I don't know a better term for it right now. The game managing quarterback, make a couple plays when we need them and be smart and safe with the ball, and we're going to be in a good spot. So I have New England at 3. I think they could move up or down, but we'll see. We'll see how the games play. And we'll move into the team that I believe will finish second, and that's the Miami Dolphins. And I guess the reason that I'm keeping the Patriots at 3 and I'm moving the Dolphins up to 2 is kind of that arms race that we talked about. We saw the Jets trying to bring in people, and the Dolphins going out and making a move for Tyreek Hill, bringing in Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert, Sony Michel, brought in Cedric Wilson, who was good with the Cowboys. You still have Mike Gesicki. You bring in Teron Armstead to really solidify the offensive line. And I'm putting the Dolphins in the number 2 spot, and it has nothing to do with what I think Tua is going to turn into as a quarterback. I am not sold on Tua. I think he's had some talent around him, but I think the Dolphins are doing the best job in the division right now of isolating the variable for the young quarterback. And Tua's in year 3. Mac Jones is going into year 2. Zach Wilson going into year 2. What the Dolphins were able to do to surround Tua with talent is, by the end of this season, they're going to know if Tua's the guy or not. You won't really be able to have an argument for it. And what I low key like about their offseason is the backup quarterback position. And we saw the Dolphins be competitive last year, and Jacoby Brissett he's a guy that I've liked as kind of like this journeyman backup. Think he could be a starter in some situations. We've seen Bridgewater have success in the league, and I'm not saying he's like a top 10 quarterback, but if you're able to add all this talent, you're adding Tyreek Hill to an offense that already had Jalen Waddle, and what the two of them bring from a speed aspect, from a talent aspect at the receiving position. If you get 6-7 games into the season and Tua's not looking like he's the guy, you can pivot to Bridgewater if you have to. If you're ready to end the Tua experiment, I think you can bring Bridgewater in and be just as competitive, if not better. So I really like that move by them. Does it create a little quarterback controversy? Whatever. I don't know. That we'll see how that shakes out, but I think it's worthwhile to put somebody that has starting experience that can really push Tua, and Bridgewater's going to be competing. He wants to be a starter in the league. So I think that's huge for the isolating the variable portion of it. And, I've seen stuff all over social media about like, oh, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are so fast, but Tua can't throw the ball more than 40 yards. And I don't think that's why the Dolphins brought in these speed guys like that. I think when you look at a team, say the Dolphins playing the Bills, I think the deep shots in the NFL like that they're few and far between. And yes, people hit home run plays, but I think the way that the defenses have evolved and some of the talent on the back end, it's very rarely, hey, just go 1-for-1 and beat your guy. A guy with Tyreek Hill's speed, we saw the Bills play against the Chiefs with that shell defense, and where guys like that can beat you is the underneath and the routes that carry the length of the field or the width of the field, and you have to go stride for stride with a guy that runs a 4.3 40, and you're talking about Tua hitting an underneath route where he has to throw the ball 5 yards. Straight ahead speed. Yeah, these guys are dumb fast, but we also have Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde over the top that really help cover up those deep shots. I think that the speed element that these guys bring in the horizontal game is going to help immensely of just using motions and stressing defenses left and right versus vertically. And I think I think those players Tua could really succeed with, and like we said, he doesn't have to have this cannon arm and be uncorking at 60 yards to Tyreek Hill running past the defenders. He can do that underneath drag route, and Tyreek Hill gets a step or two on the guy covering him, and all of a sudden it's a 50-yard gain. All he's got to do is have the ball in his hands and get a step or two of space, and he's going to create some problems for you. So overall, I think, we barely even touched on what they brought in the run game, but obviously the run game was struggling last year and didn't bring in one guy, two guys. They brought in three guys to compete for the running back spot, and I think we probably see a bit of a committee there, but I think this offense is going to be all about Gesicki, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, using their athleticism, getting the ball in space, and making guys pay with their athleticism. On defense, I think they got better, but it's not a crazy impressive group to me. Up front, Raekwon Davis, Christian Wilkins is playing on his option year, so I think we're going to see kind of the best out of him as he tries to secure a contract, whether it's with Miami or not. On the linebackers, Van Ginkel. I know there was an episode where we talked about Van Ginkel, and Andrew enjoyed his name so much. It was like he willed him into being successful, but he had a great game against the Bills. I think he's a pretty good linebacker. Jerome Baker, he's been a pretty nice, steady linebacker for them. Excuse me. Just overall, like the front seven, I think it's a pretty solid group. I don't think it's a ridiculous group, but they did extend Emmanuel Ogbah. He had 9 sacks last year, so he's a dangerous player. And then the one that I think is the most interesting in this group is Jalen Phillips, who's going into his second year. And I'd say in like the second half of the season, he really started coming on. And, being a rookie edge rusher in the NFL, playing against these grown-ass men, he ends up having 8.5 sacks in his first year. And he's a guy that going into the 2021 draft, there was talk about him being a high first-round pick, and there was some red flags about, he kind of like retired and walked away from football and yada, yada, yada. Dolphins end up getting him late first round. And I mean, if 8.5 sacks in your rookie season is kind of an indicator of where your career's going, I think he's a really important guy to keep an eye on. And then, adding Melvin Ingram. I think he's kind of... We saw him with the Chiefs last year, and he came in and made an impact, and it was this edge rusher that just kind of kept sitting out there in free agency, and I couldn't really wrap my head around it. Maybe thinking that he didn't really have much left in the tank, and I think he was a valuable piece to the Chiefs last year. And it looks like he's going to kind of be brought in here to be a rotation piece, so I think that's a great addition for them as well. The secondary is where I think they're very strong, at least defensively. Back end, Javon Holland, Eric Rowe, Byron Jones, Xavier Howard, who I believe just got a contract extension. Absolute ball hawk, can really lock people down. And then, I looked up how to say this one and everything. I'm sorry out there, Noah, for saying your name wrong. Igby Nogany. Who's a young guy who's looking really good. So on the back end of the defense, I think they have a lot of talent. And I guess on the back end and to some degree across the defensive line, I think they have a lot of talent. It's just a matter of kind of putting it all together and being able to complement what I think this offense should be able to do. So that's it. I hate giving the Dolphins credit, but similar to the Jets, they've really loaded up on draft capital and seem to be capitalizing on it. Like I said, a lot of these pieces are young. You got to see how they all fit together. But in particular, what I liked about this offseason for the Dolphins is they already had Waddle at receiver, and where the Jets were adding the receiver talent for Zach Wilson. I talked about, kind of the younger guys, the unproven talent. They go ahead and draft Tyreek Hill. Or, I'm sorry, not draft Tyreek Hill. They trade for Tyreek Hill. And if they as an organization feel like they're that close to making a run, it'd be great to have, if Garrett Wilson ends up being, one of the top receivers in the league, it's great having him for 5 years. But they went out and they spent a boatload of money on Tyreek Hill, and they know who that player is right now. And I think if you get the next step from Tua, and I'm not saying Tua has to develop into a top 5 quarterback to see it this year. I think if Tua becomes, a top 20, top 15 quarterback, and he's able to just make quick, simple reads and get the ball into these absolute elite athletes, just get Tyreek and Jalen Waddle the ball, I think they're really going to inflate his numbers and make the offense successful. So I have them coming in at number 2. Obviously, the Bills win the division. We go 17-0. We sweep the division. I think that all goes without being said. So on that note, we're going to wrap it up for today's show. Thank you again for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Make sure you are checking out the Buffalo FamBase shows going on pretty much every day of the week, live shows. You can get involved in the conversation. If you want to get involved with our show at all, you can find me on any social media at jgods22. You can reach out to my partner in crime, Andrew. He's on socials at 2changs. Or you can search up the Wandering Buffalo podcast on any social media. Leave us comments, questions, feedback, anything you want to see us talk about throughout this offseason. Let us know, and we'll see what we can get to. That's going to do it for today. And as always, go Bills.